2019 Nissan Frontier. This is a 2.5 liter engine, 4-cylinder. The truck has a very, very random misfire. I'm going to be using a pulse sensor to positively ID the cylinder that it's missing on. You guys know I've got a couple of videos out on this already. It seems to be backed by popular demand, so if you guys want to see the videos on pulse sensors, I will keep putting them out. The main question is, this video is about a 19 Frontier, so why in the hell is there a picture of a distributor there? Well, it's kind of funny. If you stick around after the Frontier video, there's going to be a little bonus footage of where I diagnosed a propane injected forklift. That is the distributor out of it. And I've got a pretty cool Pico capture, and I'm going to go over what I found wrong with it and why I think it was doing what it was doing. Had a blast diagnosing that thing, and I want to bring you guys along with it. I want to give a shout out to Autonerdz, of course. Something I haven't mentioned before, they have a newsletter type of a deal. You go on there, you sign up for it, and you'll get emails from them from specials or training events and things like that. And while we're on that subject, I wanted to make mention of a live training event that's coming up in September. It's going to be in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The details are going to be on the website, and as usual, there will be a link to the Autonerdz homepage on my description box. And once you get to that homepage, if you click on the events listed there in front of you, are going to be, some live training events, one in September, one in November, or I think December, and of course our monthly Zoom call style training. It's all on there, so have a look around. Doesn't cost anything to look through the website. I've also noticed that he is also offering monthly subscriptions to the Pico group. Definitely check into that. I don't know all the details as to what comes with the monthly subscriptions, but if I remember right, you will have access to a lot of the Nerd series recordings, which is just gobs and gobs and gobs of great information, especially with the ignition stuff. Some of the stuff that I'm going to go over here with this forklift deal, not in great detail, but I think you'll enjoy it. I had fun working on it. I've never worked on a propane injected Clark forklift before, but I found out it was I think it's a Mitsubishi engine. In fact, the part that I replaced would have fit a 2.6 liter Mitsubishi Mighty truck, 1989 genre. So, hope you enjoyed the video. I enjoyed putting it together for you guys, and probably the middle of next week, I got sent some demo leads, some Pico leads. They're BNC on one side, and of course your standard banana connection on the other side. I've been playing with them, and they are pretty damn cool. I am currently working on a video for it. I'm in the final stages, and probably midweek I'm gonna do like a little product demo for you guys that have 4425 scopes or beyond. I really think these leads will help unclutter your work area a bit, and when you see the video, you'll see what I'm understanding. You'll understand what I'm shoveling here. So, little word salad there, but thanks for watching, and appreciate the comments. 2019 Nissan Frontier 2.5 liter. I was told this vehicle runs rough occasionally, sometimes at cruise speeds, sometimes at idle. I'm using the ATS eScan, and no DTCs. All the monitors have been completed, so no one's been erasing things, which is very odd. So this actually makes it a little bit easier. It's running fine now. I took it for a little test drive, and under my mode 6 data,
it had been counting misfires on number 1. And on this test drive that I just did, I felt one very positive misfire. And I mean, it was sharp. It really felt like ignition. And I noticed that when it did misfire, that this blue lean light came on instantly, which generally means it's some sort of a fuel thing, like an injector problem. So what I'm going to have to do first is, one, I'm going to have to duplicate this condition a little more often. I want to make sure this mode 6 data is correct and it actually is number 1, because I've been told that this truck has had 4 spark plugs put in it because it is a 2.5. It's had a converter put in it, and it's had a fuel injector put in number 4 cylinder. So I can't explain what happened in the history of this vehicle, but all these repairs were recently. So I'm going to duplicate it. I'm probably going to use a pulse sensor and positively ID that it is number 1, and then we'll diagnose on from there. Wish me luck. All right, I'll show you my setup. Got a sync on number 1 for the secondary. I've got a first look sensor in the tailpipe looking for misfires, and I've got an ignition command also on number 1. I'm using the ATS E-scan, and we are refreshing this occasionally, and we're looking for misfire data. This is a very intermittent problem. So I've got ignition command here, also got a secondary probe here, and I felt like the motor just got stumbled there for a minute. Let me stop the scope. Maybe we'll get lucky. Let me read this. Alright, that didn't pick anything up. Something happened right in here. I'll have to go over this a little bit more so this video doesn't become 30 minutes long. I'm not sure what happened there. Not a classic looking misfire. We'll let the scope keep running. And then, of course, back here, I'm just running the first look sensor in the tailpipe. Take one more look. Maybe we'll get lucky. Still hasn't picked up any misfires, and I haven't seen anything on the scope. So if I catch something, we'll definitely go over it. All right. So what's the old saying? A watched pot never boils. Well, if I would have left that GoPro camera sitting there live, it would have ran out of fully 60 gig card and never misfired. But it did finally misfire, and unfortunately I didn't get it live for you guys. But here is the capture. So the blue trace I have here is ignition command. This is what turns the coil on. The red trace is the first look sensor that's in the tailpipe. And the green trace is a secondary on number 1. My goal was to prove what cylinder was misfiring, because it was very, very, very random and very intermittent. And my first impression was it at a stoplight that it was an ignition thing, but the way the scan tool flashed lean really quick, it was kind of telling me it could have been an injector thing. Well, the thing that I need to prove first is exactly which cylinder it is. And that's what the first look sensor does for me. And let me just turn, let's do it this way. So you've seen I got a sensor in the tailpipe, and what I like to do is just pull kind of a line down, and you can see odd man out here. I got there, I got there, and I got there. And these deeper pulses are the misfire. So let's go ahead and turn a sync back on, which was the blue trace. This is number 1. Get my zoom window out, and we'll look at all of them, but let's look at this one first.
this is the ignition command here. And basically the falling edge is where number 1 fires. And we see we have a deep pulse right there. Let's just make sure I'm on the right one. Yep. So if we pull out 720, which would be from there to there, and we'll pull out 4 rulers. And this is one way I figure out which cylinder it is. So if we know that number 1 is up and number 1 comes down on power and up on exhaust. So here's number 1's exhaust, and you can kind of see the ghosting right there. So number 1's on exhaust right here. So to the left side, this is number 1's exhaust. Well, we're looking for the low pull here. So this is number 1, and it follows the firing order. This is 3, 4, 2, and then it just repeats. And if you want to use a overlay, I have that. These overlay I get from Autonerdz. So simply put in your firing order 1, 3, 4, 2. I have a sync on number 1, and we'll hit go, and then we'll hit ID chart. I'll minimize that. And we pull it back up, and then you just kind of got to line everything up. So we'll line that up with that, and we'll line this up with that. And this low pulse area you see right here is on number 1. So that was our cylinder that misfired. Like I said, I have another video explaining kind of why that is. Actually, I have 2 videos on why this happens, so you might want to check those out. I'll try to link them in the description box, and it's more descriptive of why this happens. But let's look at right here. I like to check these out in several different places just to make sure. So let's pull our 720 back out here and here. So once again, number 1's up on compression, it comes down on power, it goes back up on exhaust. So right here again, that's number 1's exhaust, and we have this low pull here, which is indicating that number 1's our problem. We'll check our overlay again. I like to do both methods just in case you don't have an overlay, so I try to explain both. So there again, right there. So number 1 is positively our misfire. So is it fuel or is it ignition? I just went ahead and took a secondary probe and put on top of the coil. I mean, why not? It's easy, it's right in the front. How often does that happen? Not very, but it did this time, so I'm going to take full advantage of it. So let's look. Actually, I'm going to take the blue channel off because we've already used that information. And this right here is what I am not 100% sure on, but I'll show you what I've got. You know what? Let's go right in here where everything's fine. No misfiring right in here. So let's start with a kind of a good. Actually, that really isn't that good. Now I'm using a wand or a pickup, so you've probably heard me in the past on these things, guys. I use them, but I'm always apprehensive as to what they're telling me. These things are nothing more than an antenna. They are picking up all kinds of things, EMF wise, and they're displaying it on a scope screen. So I don't necessarily trust the numbers, but I'm kind of looking at the picture it's drawing me. So to me, this looks like a normal secondary ignition pattern. It's got a spark line of about 1.5 milliseconds. No problem. Let's start over here. So we have a misfire here, which means this is the ignition event before the misfire. And this thing is firing. It's like everything's negative. It's almost like it dropped to ground. It basically did not have any KV, and it found its way. The insulation broke down, whether it was in the coil or in the spark plug. My gut is it's in the spark plug because I've seen no physical evidence of the insulation breakdown in the coil. But it broke down right there. And then we see the misfire right there. And then even right here, let me arrow over just a little bit. We can see another low pulse here, and look at this wonky ass ignition here. We've got a lot of ringing. In fact, it clipped itself. I'm on a -7 to a +10 kV. It went negative more than 7,000 volts inductively. This is not a direct measurement. So I had a decision to make. I am guaranteed 100% this is an ignition problem. This truck had already had a catalytic converter put on it. The truck is a delivery truck, meaning it gets rode hard and put up wet. So if I were to just be held my feet to the fire and had to only put one part on this truck, I most likely would have put a spark plug in it. It's a platinum plug. The plugs didn't have that many miles on them, but they're pretty fragile. And somebody had just replaced them not too long ago, but you never know. Somebody might have ran it in with an impact gun, cracked something on the inside of it. I explained this to the parts manager. I said, it's probably a plug, but to be on the safe side, I'd do a coil and a plug. I am 100% sure that this is an ignition fault. And he said, put a coil and a plug in it. Like, there you go again. I've seen this negative firing before on a car with iridium plugs, and I had the time to swap the plugs around, and it was definitely a spark plug problem, not a coil problem. So I may have put a part on this vehicle that it didn't 100% need. But the truck had 171,000 miles on the original coils. It was an in-house type of a deal, so why not just put a coil on it? That way, when this thing's on its road delivering parts 100 miles from home, it starts breaking down again. We don't melt another catalytic converter down. So that's the reasoning behind putting a coil in it and a spark plug. But the cylinder ID portion is really what I wanted to get at with this video. Like, see right there, this spark, look, now to me that's a prime example right there. To me, this, let me just pull a cursor down. Now I got myself interested. See how high that, where the break off is? To me, that thing didn't even spark in the cylinder. It sparked, but it didn't spark in the cylinder. There was no carbon tracking on this thing. It's like there was an internal break inside of the spark plug, or maybe where the coil met the resistor that met the spring that meets the spark plug. But I took this whole thing apart. I seen no evidence of arcing. And then, so we had a high KV there, or a high spark line there, and then a misfire there. So let's go down here where we don't have a misfire. Okay, so there's no misfire in here. So look where the spark line breaks off here. Now to me, that's normal. So you're looking at almost 2,000 volt difference between a misfire here. Nope, I was wrong. A misfire here, and then a good cylinder over there. And then you got this cylinder, the very next time it fires way down here negative. Now, I don't know if there's so much energy left that it confused my wand and it fired negative. This just doesn't look good to me either. But I guess it did misfire right there. See how that one's lower? The bottom line is we were able to positively ID the cylinder. It was number one. We narrowed it down to ignition. So, and we verified that we had good IC command. So let's just do a coil and a spark plug to prevent a comeback and prevent possibly damages another converter. I'm pretty sure most of you guys out there will agree with what I'm saying. At least I hope you do, because that's the route we took. I think it was the most logical repair. Like right here, look at this one. See, now this one fires extremely low. I mean, way down here in the negative. Which, let's just put that up out of the way. And then, but see, the first look did not register a misfire. So this is like an instrumentation thing. Like I said, is a wand that I'm literally holding on top of a coil. So how accurate can it be consistently? I could have moved it. My hand could have flinched. You just never know what happens in the heat of battle. So when you're using these things, take it for what it is. Realize what you're working with. But we're also able to tell that we did have an ignition problem. And ultimately, we got the truck fixed. We drove it. It's out on delivery now, and it's running fine. So we're going to chalk this up for a fix. Now, if you stuck through this, I'm going into the forklift stuff next. So we're going to have some fun with the forklift diag, and appreciate you guys watching. So hang on. All right, so a quick backstory on the old forklift. First, it's a Clark forklift, for whatever that's worth. It does run on propane. I discovered it has a Mitsubishi engine in it, and after a lot of Googling and research, it seems that parts from a 2.6 liter 1989 Mitsubishi truck fit this bad dude. The bay that I have at the shop, I hear this forklift going behind my bay daily. They use it to load transmissions and empty trash, and it's extremely obnoxiously loud. And for weeks, I've heard this thing going by, just you know, just misfiring like crazy. Every now and then, this thing would backfire so loud it sounded like somebody was shooting crows in the field. It was kind of comical. And they had been having some dude come out and service, and I'm using quotation marks, service this thing. Well, it finally gave up the goat and broke down right in front of the dumpsters. And of course, that's the same day that the guy's coming to empty the trash dumpsters, and he can't because the forklift's blocking it. So I get the nod to go out and try to get this piece of shit to move. First thing I do is just, you know, did you guys put a new propane tank on it? Yes. Does it have propane in it? Yes. So it did. I took a little bit of brake cleaner and I sprayed up into the intake, and it's just trying to start. It's kind of popping and farting, and it's doing everything but running. At this point, I said, let's just let it set for a little while. It was lunchtime. It is hotter than the south side of hell out there where this thing's at. And I says, I'll deal with it after lunch. I go out after lunch. It's set for like an hour. And some bitch started. And man, I left all the tools on the ground, and I just wanted to get this thing to a shady spot. And it misfired and plunked and bucked and carried on, but I got it in the shop finally, and it died. So I went and got all my tools back. First and foremost, I don't know a damn thing about propane injection, but I do know that this thing has a distributor, it has an external coil, and it has 4 spark plugs and 4 spark plug wires. Now that I know a lot about. So I decided to get the scope out. I'm like, the way it sounds like a timing deal. So this is the first capture I got. And the problem is right here in this first capture. And I'll go ahead and explain it to you guys. This was very fun to me. The blue trace is ignition primary. This thing had an old school style tower. I call them a tower coil. It had the king lead coming out of the center. It had a power, and it had its trigger under 2 little 8mm screws. And that would be the blue trace. The gold here is a current ramp. Let me get my stuff straight here. The red trace is ignition secondary right on the coil wire, so I'm looking at all the cylinders. And the green is what I presume is number 1 cylinder. It was the cylinder closest to the cooling fan. I'm going to call that the front of the motor. I'm going to call that number 1. It really doesn't matter because that wasn't the problem. But what I do think is cool is this. I'm going to zoom in on the secondary here. And I'm going to turn off the primary. And we'll actually turn off the coil for a minute. The current. Only a really good scope are you going to see the rotor air gap. And you see in that red trace, that spike right there is where the spark is jumping the gap. That's the gap between the rotor and the distributor cap. And that to me is just nothing but cool. I don't get to see this quite anymore with all today's cool on plug and all that stuff. But you can see the secondary does not start building in the spark plug wire until it jumps the gap. So it builds, it builds, it builds. It comes up, it jumps the gap, and then it starts building in the spark plug wire. To me, that is just neat as hell. You cannot see this on just any scope. And you can't see it on a Picoscope unless you have your settings right. And you guys have heard me a million times. 500 milliseconds of vision will give you 1 microsecond of a sample interval. So I don't know why I did that, but let's turn it back on. I'm going to go ahead and go over what the problem is. Always turn yes to a demo device, because if people send me a file, then I can see what probes that they've ran or turned on. That way I can rule out user error if there is any. So let's go back to forklift no start. I get it in my bay, I'm cranking, this thing won't start. It's trying to start, it almost wants to start, every now and then it backfires, but it just will not start. So the answer to the question's in the coil ramping. So if you notice, let me get that out of the way. The current ramp is taking forever because this thing is cranking, and it cranks slow as all get out. It's making 3.2 amps, and I'll tell you why. There is a ballast resistor that cuts the voltage. So you got about 12 volts coming in. It cuts it down to about 9 volts. I think they do that to protect the coil a little bit, so the coil's not getting hit with all that amperage constantly. The resistance of the ballast resistor was in spec according to a Mitsubishi truck specification. So take that for what it is. So out here, the key is off. This is what I noticed first off, and I'm just going to put a line right there. We're just basically going to call this 0 amps. Key is off. I turned the key on right here. I didn't start cranking. I simply turned the key on. Well, immediately the coil starts building current with the key on. I'm not even cranking this thing yet. And I found out later, if I would have left the key on and not cranked it, the coil would have had 4 amps running through it forever. The coil was getting extremely hot the igniter or the pickup was never breaking the current. So when I started cranking this thing, which you see right here, this is the voltage drop of me cranking. When it starts cranking, and then as the engine starts picking up speed, of course, once the motor starts cranking, it doesn't take quite as many amps, and this whole capture is of it cranking but not starting. And every now and then you will see it, or I would hear it, which you guys don't have that advantage. You would hear it kind of backfire. It would putt, and you can see a little bit of activity going on here. It's trying to spark, or it is sparking here and there. Nothing crazy going on. But I do know that the coil's able to jump the gap for the distributor, and it's actually able to get spark to the plugs. And I do not like the fact that as soon as I turn the key on, I'm building current in the coil. So I decided right off the bat, there's the pickup. It basically has power coming in one side, and as this reluctor passes over this little Hall switch, it grounds the coil. It's a standard ignition. You have a power to a coil, you ground it. When you ground it, it builds current. If you break it off fast enough, it induces voltage, and then you get a spark. That's kind of in a nutshell. So let's check a look at, once I put the new module in, and the ignition module fixed this thing. Let's go back to the current ramp. I'm going to turn these channels off. So you can clearly see right in here is cranking, and then it starts and runs over here. But when I turn the key on, I'm not already grounding the coil. So this is what I think was happening. Let's you know what, let me go back to the original here. I made a reference waveform. Let's turn all this garbage off. And as you guys know, I don't pre-plan what I'm going to say. I just kind of shoot from the hip from all my videos. It seems to be more natural. So I'm going to go to Tools. I'm going to go to Reference Waveforms. So this is the no start current ramp, and I made a reference waveform of it crank to start. So let's turn that on. So it gives a little bit better. So right in here, I turned the key on, it immediately started building current. And then I started cranking it. In here, I turned the key on, there's no current. And then once I start cranking it, it starts building current. Okay? So what I'm thinking is happening is the ignition's firing at the wrong time. And the reason I say this, all right, so let's say the rotor turns this way. Now I know from testing, if I take a screwdriver or a metallic object and I tap right here, it pulls to ground. So that tells me that each one of these little levers, it's a 4-cylinder, pulls it to ground. So let's say normally it's going this way. So when it gets to this point, it pulls to ground, charges the coil, and then when it gets here, the ground goes away, it induces voltage, and then it fires. And then it comes around. It's not pulled to ground here, and then it pulls to ground, and then the process repeats. That's normal. That's what the signal shows when it runs. when the bad igniter or pickup or whatever it is, it kept it pulled to ground. So what it did, instead of it releasing in here, it had it pulled to ground here and then released it here instead of here. So it was pulled to ground, charging the coil, releasing it, pulling it to ground, releasing it. So it was firing, I think, after top dead center versus pulling the ground here and releasing. So it should be pulling here just for this amount of time, whereas with the bad pickup, it was pulling here and releasing here instead of here. So that was causing the ignition to fire, I'm thinking, late. If I would have had more time, I could have done a relative compression maybe and synced it with the firing and figured that out exactly. But the forklift is, it's like Santa's sled, man. You got to have it. It's got to be going. It's got to be rolling 100%. But I thought that was kind of neat. So basically I replaced this part right here. I set the air gap between this and this according to a 1989 Mitsubishi truck. Start the forklift up and it runs great. Here's the capture here. The new module. Hope you guys understand what I was trying to shovel there. But here we go. Here's it running fine. We still have our primary, our secondary, and our coil ramp. So let's see here. So you can still see our rotor gap, and you see the red trace is our secondary. So it really doesn't start building until it jumps the gap. And then of course our primary, when it breaks there, or basically after it's done building current, if I cut off a few of these, we'll be able to see this better right there. So there's the current ramp. So it builds up your current, and then it has to cut it off really fast, and you got to have your scope set up just right to measure this. But from time it goes from 3.9 amps to basically 0, 11.4 microseconds. That's called validating primary drive, which if you look at the Nerd series, which I talked about in the opening, Tom goes over that with a fine-tooth comb. But you can definitely see the relationship between the primary here and the secondary right there, and we get a nice spark line. So I thoroughly enjoy doing ignition work like this. I love the old school distributor stuff. I don't see it in my world anymore unless I'm working on Clark forklifts. But I hope you guys understand what I was trying to explain with the module pulling it down to the ground. It was basically pulling it to ground and releasing it, and it was sparking at the wrong time. That's why it wouldn't start. That's why sometimes it would backfire, it would carry on. You almost had to hear this thing run to understand exactly what I'm saying. But those of you guys been around and heard this type of ignition problems before probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But that was a good time. Enjoyed doing that. Enjoyed making this video for you guys. Hope you guys understood. A lot of rambling and bambling. But the point is, you got to check this stuff. Doesn't matter if it's a propane injected forklift or an old hot rod with a distributor. The shit's got to work. It's got to be in time. And you got to have a good scope to check all this stuff. And on that note, you guys have a good one. And thank you so much for watching, liking, subscribing. And I'm really loving the comments.